Good morning. I'm State Senator Chris Larson. I'm here with State Representative David Bowen, State Representative David Crowley, and Reverend Willie Briscoe. Today we are introducing the Jail Death Transparency Act. This is a bill that would change the law to match officer-investigated deaths. The first and I believe only law in the country that allows for deaths in police custody to have outside investigation. We've seen issues in custody, in corrections, where deaths have occurred, and they are not subject to that 2014 law. So what we're doing is expanding the scope of what the law does to include deaths in jails. So just as a refresher, in 2014, the legislature passed the bipartisan legislation to address the need for transparency in law enforcement involved deaths. It's common sense, and this extends that same transparency to correction officers. Since it passed, 18 deaths have had outside investigation in the state of Wisconsin. Unfortunately, over the past 5 years, 40% of deaths in Wisconsin county jails were investigated internally. 60% of cases, Sheriff's Department and offices requested neighboring police agencies to take over the case, which is good, but it's not mandatory. This bill standardizes a process of investigation after an inmate's death. Currently, Department of Corrections does review deaths at facilities. However, these reviews sometimes don't start for months after the death occurs of an inmate. And DOC staff isn't required to re-interview all key witnesses when those deaths occur, or when the investigation happens. Establishing transparency around jail deaths can improve the safety of inmates by revealing inadequate monitoring of high-risk inmates and medical standards. This would be able to independently assess mental health evaluation process and monitoring, potential to expose poor medical care at facilities in emergency response time, and able to root out ineffective and overzealous correctional officers, which is the goal of what this legislation does. It also gives assurance to families of inmates that their loved ones are going to be treated with respect and within the scope of the law when they are in the care of the state. So the bill on the statutes just adds the definition for correction officers to the existing statute that outlines specific requirements for investigation of officer-related deaths. It has to be investigated by at least 2 investigators. Investigators are employed by an outside political subdivision to make sure that there's no conflicts. And investigators must provide a complete report of their findings to the district attorney of the county in which the death occurred. This bill would allow for investigations to be held in cases of jail deaths going back 3 years if no correction officer was prosecuted. So there's the bare bones. To speak more in depth about the need for this, I give you State Representative David Crowley.
Thank you, and good morning. First, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Senator Larson for co-authoring this important piece of legislation. The members of the legislature and community members who weren't able to make it here today. The Jail Death Transparency Act is truly common sense legislation. Currently in Wisconsin, when somebody dies in the custody of local jail or departments, it is left to the presiding agent of custody to decide how that jail will be investigated. At the time when many people in different communities have an increasing distrust for law enforcement officers, the use of internal investigations can be seen as a possible way to cover up mistakes or potential criminal neglect by these departments. Please remember that these people who are in prison in these jails are people. They are Wisconsin citizens, American citizens, that have died under the supervision of other people. These people have families, and those families want and deserve answers when their loved one has ended. In Milwaukee County alone, 4 people have died under the supervision of Sheriff Clark, with only one of these investigations resulting in, only one of these deaths resulting in an outside investigation. At the same time, there has been little to no information provided to the grieving families, leaving loved ones with no closure and feeling wrong. To increase transparency for the families and the public, we must require independent investigations of all deaths that occur in jail and corrections custody. That is exactly what this bill does. It extends the same transparency standards that we currently have for law enforcement officers related to deaths, and we just want that to apply to correctional officers. So I would like to introduce Reverend Willie Briscoe, former president of MICA, who has a special perspective, having worked at the House of Correction for over 2 decades before retiring and leading the charge to end the prison pipeline. So I want to ask that Reverend Briscoe come up and speak.
Thank you, Representative. My name is Reverend Willie Briscoe. I am currently the president of Wisdom, a state-based social justice organization that is also faith-based. Many individuals don't realize that when someone is in custody, they still remain a citizen of this state, of this country. And their in custody situation places them where they're not able to care for themselves medically or able to move about to care for themselves physically. So that is a moral and legal imperative on these institutions, the entire care of anyone that's in their custody. What this bill will do will highlight and put a camera on situations that will force jails to look at their policies and procedures, look at their medical staff and their medical treatment of individuals, and realize that they have a responsibility that goes beyond the prison walls. They go out into the households of these individuals because they have family members that sometimes are left in the dark when these incidents occur. This will actually place a responsibility on individuals who have individuals in custody who are accounting for their care and their well-being to be held accountable in the wrongful deaths. This is something that is long time coming, and it should be in every institution, because every institution within their policies and procedures has some statement that they are responsible for the care and safety of individuals that they incarcerate. But we want to go one step further and make it clear that they have to be transparent in how they are handling the safety of these individuals when incidents occur, that they are held responsible, and that the families of these individuals are allowed to see what's going on behind these walls so that they can get closure when this happens. This is by no means trying to criminalize or penalize somebody, but if there is some wrongful doing, this will find it out. And if there are some policies and procedures need changing, this will upgrade them. So this is actually better for institutions that they operate under the law of transparency than under the law of secrecy, because these individuals are family members, are our loved ones, and they should be cared for as such. Thank you.
I am State Representative David Bowen, Ranking Member on Corrections Committee for the Assembly Democrats. And I just want to make sure that I thank the members behind me, Senator Larson, Representative Crowley, Reverend Briscoe, President of Wisdom. I want to make sure we highlight the fact that this is very important legislation that we definitely need implemented in our correctional facilities, making sure that accountability is there. And we know that there has been an uptick in the deaths in our jails. So we want to make sure that there is transparency for the sake of our families, for the sake of our community, so that there can be trust in our system, so that those same entities and the leaders of those entities, especially our Sheriff's Department and especially in Milwaukee County, are not left to investigate themselves. We know that lack of accountability breeds corruption, and we want to make sure that that is not happening. That's the only comments that I have, and I want to open it up to the press corps and thank them for coming this morning. And if you guys have any questions, we will take those questions now.
A two-part question here. How many co-sponsors do you have on this, and are any of them Republicans?
No problem. All the authors.
Right on. We're putting it out today for co-sponsorship. So we'll see the deadline. I believe we're putting it at a week. And at the end of that, we'll see. If you remember when we had the transparency in police deaths, that enjoyed broad bipartisan support. We would hope that this would be the same.
Are you concerned that because you're clearly targeting Milwaukee County above all else in your comments today, although this would be statewide, are you concerned that the involvement of Sheriff Clark may make some Republicans pause before they endorse this bill?
Sheriff Clark registers as a Democrat, so that shouldn't make anybody hesitate to jump on from the Republican standpoint. But in all seriousness, I think that it's a good government thing. Sheriff Clark will not be there forever, and the this is something that impacts the entirety of the state. And I think Wisconsin right now is at the forefront of this, right? We're the first ones in the country to have outside investigations of police-involved deaths or deaths in police custody. So we'd hope that we would have that same bipartisan support.
Does anyone know, is there uniformity in policies and procedures and expectations across all 72 county jails? Or are we talking about a wide kind of variety of what is and is not under staff?
I would say that there's not complete uniformity. Some of the practices that have been engaged in the Milwaukee County Jail that we've been sued for, other counties have not had those same issues because they have not been implementing those same practices. So I think that's a clear indicator that everything might not be uniform. Would this cover all deaths in custody, including deaths that the law enforcement agency says were due to suicide?
This would be any, right?
Yes.
Any deaths in custody, yeah.
The investigated by at least 2 investigators, would those have to be outside sheriff's offices or agencies that run jails, or could those be police departments? Are you hoping that DOJ would investigate?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the exact same way that the previous bill around police-involved shootings, that's how it works. Any outside law enforcement agency, but it is primarily kicked to the DOJ first, and then if other agencies have the capacity, it can be routed to their agencies. It just cannot be the same law enforcement agency that those officers or those where that situation happened.
Right now, there's a suburban group that's investigating the most recent Milwaukee police shooting. Would you think that same model would be okay for this? A suburban group of agencies could come in?
Well, we're definitely looking up at this same model. We're not looking to change that. I know that there has been issues from community members as it relates to that model, but right now we're looking at pretty much adding correctional officers to the existing statute that is currently there.
I think there's to further what Representative Crowley said, it's that the law as it exists, I think there's definitely good conversations happening about the efficiency of that law and how it's being enacted. This is building on that and saying let's look at what works here and making sure that there's increased transparency by an outside entity when there is a death in custody. The internal controversies, the internal discussion about the efficiency of the law as it is, changes to that. That's a conversation for another bill.
I'm sorry.
Somebody started with a question. It was you.
I
Yeah.
apologize for getting
That's
so
okay.
late. Can you tell me what brought this legislation out? Why you decided to do this? Please?
Yeah, so the bill is called Jail Death Transparency Act, and this is because over the past 5 years, 40% of deaths in Wisconsin county jails were investigated internally, and that the deaths within jails are not subject to the law of where deaths in police custody are investigated by an outside entity. So we're putting this bill forward to correct that gap, to make sure that all these deaths are investigated with transparency, to make sure that things are on the up and up.
Are there specific cases that made people question what was going on?
I think there's, for us, I think that it's broadening this, but yeah, we've seen deaths in police custody in Milwaukee that specifically, and I don't want to take talking points from Representative Crowley, but I believe it was 3 of 4 of those deaths in county custody were internally investigated, and that's a problem, right? If they're coming up with this on their own. So we're a transparency kind of a state, and we've tended that way throughout our history. This extends that history.
Chris, if there hadn't been 4 in custody deaths last year in Milwaukee County,
would you all be offering this spring?
I mean, the legislature, hopefully, we are addressing problems as they occur and not, I don't think we have enough time to address problems that aren't real problems, right? This is something that is a concern. It's a part of a lot of conversations in Milwaukee, but again, it's part of conversations across the state. And suffice it to say, the explanations or lack thereof from the sheriff leading us to make sure that we have transparency.
Can I add this too, Senator? And matter of fact, Crowley, you want to go in on the deaths that have occurred, a little bit of the details?
Yes, I can. So for those who don't know, yes, we had 4 deaths in Milwaukee County Jail, one of them being an infant that was born. One of those deaths had an external investigation, but the other 3 hasn't. And for the fact that it has been over, if I'm not mistaken, over 8 months, 9 months, and the grieving families have not gotten anything, that's a problem. As to answer your question about, what we would have introduced this if this would have happened with City of Milwaukee cops, I think this is an issue of not whether we're going to be reactive. It's about what we're going to do to make sure that there's transparency in any system in government. And when we're talking about corrections, when we're talking about law enforcement, the people who go through these particular systems are already on the other side of the aisle to where they may not be believed, they may not have no credibility, but we need to make sure that we're protecting their rights as citizens while they are incarcerated. And so again, this is really about transparency and not necessarily a reaction to what's been going on in Milwaukee County. Deaths have happened in Milwaukee County, but we also know that deaths have happened across this state as well. So I don't want to say that this is a direct result of the sheriff. This is just making sure that we have transparency throughout the state and that people can actually trust in what's going on as it relates to these investigations, especially the grieving families.
I know this isn't specifically what we're talking about, but do any of you have any thoughts as to whether or not the existing statute, how the investigations are conducted, especially with the internal reviews by the local departments, does any of that language need to be changed? If you want to address that.
So when talking about this bill in the community definitely love the fact that we want to hold correctional officers accountable, and some of them are a little weary of the particular process because it may be neighboring communities, or in this particular case, Milwaukee Police Department may have relationships for those with those in county jails. Though that may be valid, I think right now we need to focus on how we can strengthen the transparency within our prisons and county jails as it relates to in custody deaths. But as it relates to the process of this, I think this gives us an opportunity to really figure out how to change this. If I'm not mistaken, the current statute we have is 2 years old?
Mm-hmm. Passed in 2014.
Passed in 2014. And so let's give it a time to work itself out. We know it's not perfect, and I think that this is an opportunity for us to build upon that. But I appreciate these questions because I think you're telling us that we need to write a new bill.
And to look at it holistically.
Thanks for all the questions.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
You so much.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, I'm sorry. You can't hear me.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of a disaster.
I'm good. How are you? Are you guys co-sponsors?
Yeah.
Could I just talk to one more?